Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ixalan spoilers. And today is a super exciting day because a couple hours ago, I got to reveal our official exclusive spoiler over on the MTGGoldfish website, and that's the card we're starting off with today, Somatic Compass, which flips around into Spires of Arazka. So if you want to hear an in-depth discussion of this card with some deck lists and so forth, make sure to head over to the MTGGoldfish website. There's a whole article breaking down Thematic Compass. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So Thematic Compass, 2-mana artifact, you can pay 3, tap it, search for a basic land. Once you get to 7 lands, you flip around into Spires of Arazka, which is basically a Maze of Ith that taps for mana. So the comparison for this card, the front half is quite literally Journeyer's Kite, an old rare originally from Kamigawa, and Journeyer's Kite is kind of a commander staple, saw a bit of play in standard back in the day in control decks, and then Spires of Arazka is very much Maze of Ith. You lose some weird fringe things, you can't untap your own Glorybringer to save it from combat or something like that, because it only targets opponent's creatures. However, it also taps for mana, which makes it a big upgrade over Maze of Ith. So as far as where this card fits in standard, I think Thematic Compass kind of fills the Sunset Pyramid role. We've seen Sunset Pyramid creeping up into control decks. Basically, if you're playing a slow controlling deck or even like a multicolor aggro deck, you can play Thematic Compass, use it to slowly grind out card advantage, hit your land drops, which you really want to be doing in a control deck anyway or a mid-range deck, while also leaving up removal, leaving up counter spells. So basically, you just pass the turn. If you got to disallow something, awesome. If you got to Vraska's Contempt something, awesome. If not, you get to just search for a land, and then eventually, you're going to flip around into Spires, which is a great way for a slower deck to deal with hard to deal with threats. It's awesome against hasty creatures that dodge sorcery speed removal. Just tap it to untap a Glorybringer, not take the damage, fizzle the combat damage trigger from Gishath, Verdurous Gearhulks, any big thing. It's really powerful in those situations. The big question for Thematic Compass is, what is Ixalan Standard going to look like? It's actively bad against aggro decks. So if everyone's playing Ramen Red, everyone's playing Pirate Aggro, this card's going to have a hard time finding a main deck home. It's just too slow to play this on turn 2 against those decks. Search out a land on turn 3, you're going to be dead while you're just kind of fiddling around with Compass. So I think where it really shines is in those control matchups, in those mid-range matchups. So if the format's a bit slow, a bit controlling, Thematic Compass is going to be a really solid option there. Very possibly a main deck card, just generating card advantage, helping keep your life total high once it flips around. But if the format's very aggro focused, probably more of a sideboard card that you could bring in your control deck in control matchups. Also going to see a ton of playing Commander. Just in general, Journeyer's Kite is playable, and it's especially good in Sasya Orochi Ascendant decks, because Sasya wants you to have lands in your hand. It actually actively wants you to have lands in your hand rather than the battlefield, where most decks want Cultivates and Rampant Growths to get their lands right on the battlefield. It's actually an upside, because then you get to flip your Sasya around, becomes this huge mana producer. So a great Commander card, a reasonable standard card, but a little bit metagame dependent. Our next card we have today is Conqueror's Galleon, which is a new vehicle, one of the more unique vehicles we've seen in a while. 4 mana, you get a 2/10, but the crew cost is very high. The crew cost is 4. However, once you attack with it, you get to transform. So what's the payoff for Conqueror's Galleon? You get Conqueror's Foothold, which is one of the more absurd lands, I think, in Magic's history. Not only does it tap for a generic mana, for 2 mana you get to loot, for 4 mana you just straight up draw a card, and for 6 mana you get to return any card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you can get this flipped around into Conqueror's Foothold, it is an absolutely absurd land. It's going to win a ton of games in any sort of slow controlling deck. The amount of advantage you get from this card once it's in land form is just off the charts. The other upside, I guess, of Conqueror's Galleon is, while it's not great on offense, you're mostly just trying to get in that attack and flip it around. It is a pretty reasonable defender. It blocks basically any non-flyer in the format because of the massive 10 toughness, so you can use it that way as well. The question's going to be, where does this card fit? Conqueror's Foothold seems at its best in kind of a slow controlling deck, where you leave up your mana, you get all this advantage from drawing cards and returning things, and it just generates so much advantage. But the question here is, how do you actually get the flip? Control decks today might have some Scarab Gods, maybe some Torrential Gearhulks, but a pretty low number of creatures. And if you don't have a critical mass of creatures, you can't consistently get Conqueror's Foothold, which is clearly the payoff of this card. You're playing Conqueror's Galleon not to damage your opponent, not to really be defender, although it does work that way. You're playing it just to get it to flip into Conqueror's Foothold, where you have an amazing land. So the question is going to be, how do you make that work? So overall, I think the card has a lot of potential to be powerful. I just don't know its fit in Standard. In Commander, this is like an auto-include if you're playing a creature deck. Why not? The land is just so good. So if you're playing a bunch of creatures, just slot it into your Commander deck automatically. In Standard, I think it has potential thanks to the power of Conqueror's Foothold, but we got to see how things shake out, where it actually fits, if there's a deck that is slow and controlling enough to want Conqueror's Foothold, but also having enough creatures to consistently flip Conqueror's Galleon into Conqueror's Foothold. Next on our list, we have a new vampire, Sanctum Seeker, which is kind of the vampire version of Hellrider. You lose out on haste, but you gain the advantage to actually gain life. It's very similar to Brutal Horde Chief in a sense, except this only triggers on vampire. You get an extra toughness, which is nice because we have Abrades, we have the return of Lightning Strike, which we'll talk about later, so it dodges some removal. I think the big question with Sanctum Seeker is, do we have enough vampires to make a vampire deck? If you look right now, before Ixalan, the only two vampires we have in Standard are Gifted Aetherborn and Yahani Undying Partisan, which are solid. They're definitely reasonable cards. Yahani, especially if you have some sort of self-sacrifice themed deck. And as far as Ixalan, we've seen Bloodcrazed Paladin, but we haven't seen a ton of new vampires yet. I think it's the tribe that we have seen the least support for out of all the Ixalan tribes. So if vampires get enough support to be good, I imagine Sanctum Seeker is a great top end. If you can just curve out 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop Sanctum Seeker, it's going to close out games really quickly. The question is, do we get enough good vampires to make it work? Because the only place you can really play this is in a vampire deck. It's not good enough to play outside of dedicated vampire tribal. So if vampires are good, I expect Sanctum Seeker to see a lot of play. If vampires aren't good enough, then Sanctum Seeker's probably going to end up on the sidelines. Next up, we have a bunch of commons and uncommons. First up, we have Lightning Strike, the return of Lightning Strike, and while it might seem weird to be excited for this card, Lightning Strike is way better than any of the 2-mana burn spells we've had in Standard for a long, long time. I mean, it was only a set ago that we were getting Open Fire. How disappointing was our 3-mana Lightning Strike? So even though Lightning Strike obviously isn't Lightning Bolt, it's actually very good compared to what we have had in Standard, and it's really exciting to see Wizards just a little bit pushing the power level up on some of these burn spells. As far as seeing play in Standard, most obvious home is it just replaces Incendiary Flow, which is kind of a key card to Ramanant Bread, so rather than losing Incendiary Flow, Ramanant Bread actually gets an upgrade in Lightning Strike, although it'll see play in lots of places. Torrential Gearhulk control decks will want this as one of their primary removal spells. We talked about Ramanant Breads. It could even show up in some number in energy decks, although they do have Harness Lightning, they do have a Braid already, so we'll have to see where it fits into that mix, but overall, Lightning Strike is super exciting to have back, and it shows that Wizards is listening and is taking steps to kind of push up the power level just a little bit in terms of early game interaction. So glad to have Lightning Strike back, even though I expect that I will lose to it quite often as aggressive decks throw burn spells at my face. Next up, we have Siren Storm Tamer, which is a super sweet uncommon for the pirate deck. So 1-mana 1/1 flyer, but you can pay 1 and sack it to counter a spell or an ability that targets you or a creature you control. So we actually just played yesterday for Budget Magic, favorable wins, a deck built around 1/1 flyers for 1 mana in Modern, and Siren Storm Tamer fits right into this deck list. It's another disruptive 1-mana flyer that's actually super powerful. It's a little bit annoying that you have to leave up the 1 mana to make it work. However, the thing about Mausoleum Wanderer and Judge's Familiar is if the game goes long, they lose a lot of value. Force spikes eventually you kind of just run out of utility because your opponent has enough lands to pay for them. Siren Storm Tamer is going to be a hard counter for certain spells no matter how late in the game you get, which I think means having a 1-mana cost to activate actually is still a fine deal. As far as standard goes, I expect this to just slot right into the 1-drop slot in a pirate deck. It seems so good there. You get such a strong curve leading up to potentially Admiral Beckett Brass, and having flying makes it even better with Admiral Beckett Brass, because Beckett Brass, remember, wants you to get in damage so you can start stealing your opponent's stuff, and the easiest way to do that is have evasive creatures. So I imagine there's some really scary pirate curves coming soon to Ixalan Standard, with Siren Storm Tamer into Fathom Fleet Captain, into Ruin Raider, into Admiral Beckett Brass. The deck just kind of builds itself, so it seems like a key piece to Pirate Tribal in Ixalan Standard. Moving from pirates to the world of dinosaurs, our next uncommon is Drover of the Mighty, which is basically the dinosaur version of Channeler Initiate, a 2-mana mana dork that gets big if you meet a certain condition. So Channeler Initiate, obviously you gotta remove the counters or put them on something else. Drover of the Mighty just gets big if you have a dinosaur, so I think this will be a fairly heavily played 2-drop. If dinosaurs are a thing, I think it really depends on your build. You got Servant of the Conduit, which is a good mana dork for energy decks. You got Channeler Initiate, which is a good mana dork for -1/-1 counter decks. You got Drover of the Mighty, which is a good mana dork for the dinosaur deck. So I think you just kind of pick and choose based on the style of your deck. I don't think Drover of the Mighty would replace Servant in a lot of decks, or maybe even Channeler Initiate. But if you're playing dinosaurs, becoming a 3/3 is definitely a nice upside, letting your 2-drop do some attacking, do a bit more blocking, while still adding mana. Next up, we have Deadeye Quartermaster, another sweet uncommon, another pirate actually. This one, 4 mana 2/2, when it enters the battlefield, you get to tutor up an equipment or a vehicle, and thankfully there's some sweet on-curve vehicles to tutor up. We were talking about Conqueror's Galleon earlier, that's potentially a sweet target. Sky Sovereign is right on curve, turn 4 Deadeye Quartermaster, turn 5 you tutor up the Sky Sovereign, play the Sky Sovereign. Could see play just tutoring up vehicles in general. Also seems powerful in Metalwork Colossus decks, because when you're tutoring up that Conqueror's Galleon, when you're tutoring up that Sky Sovereign, you're not only getting a powerful vehicle, but you're also getting a card that's reducing your Metalwork Colossus's mana cost by a significant amount. So I think that's the most likely known home. Next up, we have Call to the Feast, another vampire card, and this one's just kind of the vampire lingering souls, I guess. 4 mana, you make 3 1/1 white vampires with lifelink. It actually compares pretty favorably to Strom's Expertise. You lose out on the upside of casting a card for free, which is a big deal, but you do get the lifelink vampires, which is a nice upside. Lifelink helps you stay alive, helps you stabilize. We were just talking about Sanctum Seeker. Seems like a nice synergy there. Whether or not this is competitive, I'm not sure, but getting 3 bodies and then using those bodies to drain with the Sanctum Seer does seem like a pretty sweet plan. We also got Wanted Scoundrels, which is just not very good. It sounds good. 2 mana 4/3, way above the curve, it's a pirate. The problem is when it dies, your opponent gets 2 treasure artifacts, basically Lotus Petals, which means you're going to get it Fatal Push, you're going to get it Lightning Strike, and then your opponent's just going to like cast a 4-drop or a 5-drop on turn 2, and things go very bad. As far as the rest of the cards, we got a bunch of less exciting commons and uncommons. Unfriendly Fire is a fine limited removal spell, not really potential for standard. Queen Bay Soldier, it's a grizzly bear, it's in black, it is a vampire, but unlikely to see standard play. Deathless Ancient is a bit interesting, just because you can keep getting it back from your graveyard for free, but at 6 mana, it's a lot to be getting it back and forth from your hand to the battlefield to the graveyard. So while it could have some potential in some sort of aristocrat style deck, it's just really expensive. Finally, we have Headwater Sentries, a lot of toughness, fine blocker for limited, and Shapers of Nature, which is a sweet way to, I guess, move some counters around. 3 for 3 isn't horrible. It is a Merfolk. It could see play in Merfolk Tribal, although the abilities are pretty expensive, so it's more of a late game card with a reasonable body, so we'll have to see just how good the Merfolk end up being. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Ixalan spoilers for today. So what do you think? How good is Thematic Compass? How good are the lands that Thematic Compass and Conqueror's Galleon flip into? Spires of Urzaka and Conqueror's Foothold. What do you think about the new tribal cards? Can vampires with Sanctum Seeker actually make it? Is Siren Storm Tamer a playable pirate 1-drop? How about Drover of the Mighty and Deadeye Quartermaster? Call of the Feast, is that the pirate Is that the Vampire Lingering Souls? Can it actually see constructed play? How excited are you to have Lightning Strike back? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.